over the last few years. And in my real life, I've spent about 40 years as a nurse. I'm a clinical nurse. I've worked in pediatrics a lot, pediatric ICU, which is probably my favorite. I say I've seen more kids die than I have adults, which is absolutely true because I've worked in a tertiary level hospital. And unfortunately, in pediatric intensive cares that are a tertiary level hospital, you're going to find kids die, whether it's from trauma or whether it's from whatever it might be. It can be trauma, of course, but it can be many other reasons they will die. And so most of my life I've done that. I've been a midwife for a number of years. And I've done health education, and my doctorate's in public health, health education. So I kind of like education. And I've stayed teaching online medical terminology just to keep myself happy and keep myself working. And so Gary asked if we could just mention about the terms that we have here that might be specific to this topic. And I want this to be interactive because I think language develops and it changes all the time. So what we learn and say today might not be what everybody is going to be saying. And so we want to use the right terms, and I think young kids who are dealing with sexuality have no clue as to what to say. They don't have the language even to talk about things that we might see or discuss in the classroom, whether it's geography or it's science or anything. They don't have the language, and definitely when they start talking about sexuality, and they need to understand how to use terms specifically. And we use language, we can be manipulated by it. We hear what we want to hear, and maybe we don't know how to respond to things. We don't know how to say it to be understood or understand what's being said to us. So we're going to look at a few things here so that we will be able to educate others. And I really think that this is important, that we should be able to educate others so that they're not automatically thinking certain things. This doesn't seem to go very quickly. Okay, so what is pedophilia? So we might use the term a paraphilic disorder, and really no one when you're talking to anyone is going to understand anything like that, nor do I think it's necessary that we should understand that. Any intense and persistent sexual interest other than considered normal. Well, of course, what do we consider normal? You know, that there's a whole band of normalcy. So a paraphilic disorder. And so here are some of the things that we might consider pedophilia as being: an orientation, and that's where the DSM-5, the textbook that one kind of used, when an individual has not acted on the attraction to children and is not distressed by the attraction. So is it an orientation? I put question marks after these because I think we can agree it's a lot of these things. An interest, and as Gary was saying, that they changed orientation and put interest in there. So, you know, the thing that we think of as orientation right away is we think of a sexual orientation, we think of the gay population, and we think this is an orientation. So, okay, an interest, a disorder. Now, you get me off on disorders. I have a lot to say about disorders because I've dealt with this a lot. But a mental disorder, but notice here it says a disorder, the DSM-5 says a mental disorder is sexually acted out with a child, and 2, are distressed, and 3, 16 years old. So you've got 3 things there: 16 years old and a child, the child is 5 years younger. So you need 3 things there for it to be a mental disorder. What about a preference? I mean, I think in the gay community, there might be a preference for people to have, be in a gay relationship. An attraction. Some of these fit your ideas.
I like to use the word attraction.
attraction, an addiction. Some people don't feel the addiction, or maybe the therapists here might talk about the addiction model and how it applies and how it's related. Do you feel that it is an addiction? I know some people who do feel that pedophilia is an addiction. Anyone like to comment on that?
I think it can be.
It can be. Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't necessarily think it always is, but I think depending on your obsession with it, it would probably meet the definition of it.
And you know, to go to sex addicts, to go to some program that is then supporting. Some find this very helpful. But you know, it's not one size fits all. There's a variety. So an obsession.
Before you leave addiction,
yeah.
I met a therapist in Salt Lake City who uses the addiction model, has groups growing by leaps and bounds, has a very fancy office, and she says, I've outgrown this already in the last 3 months. So, you know, if it works to me to use the addiction model, but some people with pedophilia say, it's not an addiction to me. You know. I can see that more with pornography, looking at pictures of children being an addiction. I don't know.
But you know, I think what we have to be able to do when we become informed about this is to be able to say, to understand what they're saying and have thought through it. I mean, to prevent so many things, we talk about primary prevention or secondary prevention. To prevent something before it happens, you have to have some sort of knowledge or understanding. And you know, as you put these things through your mind, what am I thinking? Am I thinking that that it is an obsession? Am I thinking that I'm totally addicted? I'm addicted to this sort of thing. And give room for, you know, other people who don't see it this way and realize that it's not one set. Or a perversion, contrary to natural or normal. Okay, etiology. How does pedophilia become, how does it happen? Well, if you read some of these books here of Gary's, or if you've read any books, there's no one set way that we're going to say, this is the only way. Now, we know that we can get German measles from someone who's had German measles. It's not rocket science. You catch it and you've got the same disease. You know that you can get other contagious diseases from eating something, you know, gastroenteritis and whatever. You're on a cruise and you hear about all these people developing whatever if they are developing as diseases. But you know, there are a number of contributing factors. Sometimes it's not just one thing that's going to turn someone develop a disease. The same is here. This is not a disease, but how do people express it? And I put down 4 ways here. Cross-wiring, prenatal cross-wiring, interesting term, cross-wiring. James Cantor very much believes in that something is just a little different, that this appears, and it's a sexual orientation. It's something that is within the person that happened during pregnancy. I think there's some truth in that, because the more we know about these sort of things, the more diseases and behaviors, and you talk about autism and all these other things that, you know, have come to the fore, and science is proving a lot of stuff. We'll know more. Sexual experiences. Would you be affected by a sexual experience that occurred if you didn't have that original leaning towards pedophilia? Would it not affect anyone at all? Or do you have to have that sexual experience when you were a little kid? What about abuse, childhood abuse? Does that make a person a pedophile? No, not necessarily, but this could be a contributing factor. Of course, we know for sure that just because you were molested as a child is not that you're going to become a molester. Might be, but it is not necessarily the same thing that would happen. And then surrogate sexual expression, you use that quite frequently, Gary. Would you like to just elaborate on that?
I must be getting old. I can't remember why I used the word surrogate.
Well, that it wasn't of,
Oh, okay.
you are getting old, just remember.
So these would be people that are not generally sexually attracted to children, but for convenience. So the surrogate would be they can't find an adult partner, so they pick the next nearest thing, child.
Right.
Or maybe they are into power control issues, so they pick on the children. So that's why surrogate.
Yeah, so, it's not one set way that we're thinking of. I think a lot of people would use other terms other than pedophile, minor attracted person, which is a very respectable way of dealing with pedophilia. But then if you watch the television, and you probably all seen that child molester is equally used as pedophile, and there's no difference made.
We
Now,
need to make that difference.
we need to, because I don't think the news channels know the difference from what I see. And when I had time when I was nursing, and I had someone, they'd say, "Well, what does your husband do?" And I would tell them that he works with child sexual abusers or pedophiles or non-abusing pet. They had no idea that there's a difference between pedophile and child molester. I think the public wants to know. I think they're ready. I never found any problem with the people with whom I spoke about this. They really wanted to know something. It wasn't off-putting. I think the world is ready for something that's a little bit better than what is being produced by the news broadcasters and everybody else. So a few terms that we've got here: sexuality, which we're very everybody understands sexuality, I think, even now, but kids are so onto this in school. You don't have to wait till one's grown up. They're talking about all sorts of topics that we as children would have never even heard of. And they are talking about sexuality and how they feel and what are their relationships and who can go to which restroom and not, and all of these things. I think it's good that they should be discussing it, but somehow they don't include pedophilia in that list. This is something that still is cast aside because it's child molesting, which it isn't. So we have to get the message out that this is a separate matter. Disexuality, I get upset with this one. DYS, of course, is dis, and it's bad or difficult. And then I have a lot of medical terms, dystocia and all these other things, because it's bad or difficult. But spelled dis, like this, dissexuality, coined by Dunkelfeld, is basically saying, what is normal, what is not normal, and of course, is masturbation normal or is it abnormal? There's discussion about this. Some people feel that it is we should have put a vote in on that. We'll put it in next year. Let's vote and see what people think, whether masturbation is an acceptable behavior or is really bad. Because there's going to be a difference of opinion on this. But it isn't, I'm so used to having my mouse here.
More specifically, the question would be whether or not pedophiles should be permitted or allowed or approved to masturbate to fantasies of children, fantasies involving children, whether that's good, healthy, or whether the therapist is going to try to get them to change that, use aversion therapy or some kind of thing to get them to avoid fantasies involving children.
And sexual orientation and enduring patterns. This seems to be what is listed as having to apply to an orientation, an enduring pattern of romantic or sexual attraction to persons of opposite sex or gender, both sexes, or more than one gender. It's not something that is a fad, like passes in a few days, and then you're through an orientation. So we put a few things that are people will interchange pedophilia with a child molester. So ped, of course, comes from the Greek boy or child, and of course pedophiles are not attracted solely to boys, but that's where it came from, phile, one that loves. It is a scientific term, so it is what it says, and of course language changes. So it's here sexually attracted to a pre-adolescent child, has a sex drive directed towards children, but then with the molester, you'll notice just a little further down it says has committed child sexual abuse, whereas the attraction might be there for a pedophile. Thanks very much. But it is, they have not acted on it necessarily. But a pedophile can act on this, and then they will be over in the child molester area, because some child molesters are pedophiles, of course. Some are sociopaths, and the people that really are obnoxious are dangerous, and maybe should not be given freedom ever. But this is huge. This, you know, some people are way down here, some people are way up here. Majority of people are in the middle of the bell curve. But when you're watching these sort of things on television, they don't make any difference. They just interchange the two words. I think you've probably all seen these, but just notice there's a different Latin name given for different ages. Age of attraction, most pedophiles will know what age they are attracted to, fairly specifically, like 7 to 9, or 4 to 5, or 11s, 12s, and there are some specific names if you ever saw them, that you have some sort of idea.
There's a question here.
Yeah.
What about attraction? Is it specific, more often specific to one gender?
Well, the people will have that attraction to the one gender, most certainly would be, but it's
One or the
not.
other or both.
It's not a hard and fast rule. Unfortunately, like anything, we're all different people. But overall, here, attraction and gender preference, which might answer that a little bit more. Some people are exclusively pedophilic, and they only like children, whatever, pre-adolescent. Then you go down primarily pedophilic, so if anything's primary, it's their first choice. Second choice would be an adult. And so these can go on, that you would have just variations, and there's no hard and fast rule. And then gender, one gender the same or different from teleophile, so someone might be attracted to little girls, and yet they're married to a man, or they might be attracted to little boys and they're married to a woman, or in a long-term relationship with a woman. So, it's not a matter of this is something and this, there's a big mix, different gender preferences for differing age of child. So I have just completed a book which basically is written for Christians, because as a Christian, I think that it's about time the Christian community stood up and were pleasant. They're trying to be pleasant to homosexuals, but they don't understand pedophilia. And churches are rife with people who care about children, but they might well be pedophiles and acting on it. And churches are very naive. I appreciate my church because it's developing a program that is trying to protect children, and I think we should. But in writing that book, I recognize there's so much variation between the attractions, between genders, between what one person will do. I have included quite a long chapter about child molesting, not just about non-offending pedophiles, because they exist and they prey on children. But what we want to do is that not all pedophiles want to act on their attraction. Let's give them some help so that they are not going to act on that attraction and that they don't feel that there's, very often use it, a ticking time bomb, that if it doesn't happen today, it's going to happen 2 months down the line or 2 years down the line or whatever. We need to give some hope, but we need to give some education to our church people. I have called it untouchable. God, what is it? Reaching out to God's, I don't even remember the full title of it. Yeah.
Looking at the slide where you had the monikers, pedophile, like, my understanding of pedophilia was you only consider someone a pedophile if they're only attracted to children and have no attractions to them at their own age. And at that point, if they have, like you mentioned, secondary attraction to adults, would that person still be considered a pedophile or a pedophilic attraction?
I think that the terminology, they had a pedophilic attraction is works, but and you can see, Gary, they can be pedophiles who also are in relationships with adults, and so, but you should not discard that attraction that they have. Gary?
There are some professionals that use it that way. I like the DSM because they seem to be a little broader. The DSM-5 separates pedophilia as a word that we use to describe any sexual attraction to prepubescent children. So they would actually exclude the pedophiles in these attractions. But the word pedophilia would apply to those who are somewhat attracted to children, any attraction to children. But the word pedophilic disorder would be more the word.
Only attraction, no attraction to similar age.
Yeah, I don't think it's a real fine line for even among mental health professionals. Because what are we going to call it if it's not, if it's secondary or.
Right, that's kind of what I was talking about.
It's not pedophilia. Pedophilia is attraction to children, so we don't say you're half gay.
Right.
So, we can use the word bisexual for people that are attracted to both males and females, but here we might say right. I'll later and I'll get into some more nuances of the use of those words. People can identify, so it's kind of like an identity. It's like gay. Are you gay? Well, you're not part of the club. Gay is really not a sexual orientation. Homosexuality is a sexual orientation. Gay is an identity. It's like a church. It's like a private club where you get accepted or you don't. So for a long time, bisexuals weren't accepted in the club because they weren't exclusive. So that would be a similar parallel to that. Bisexuals were on the outs with the gay club, and they weren't accepted by straight people.
And of course, children are considered here DSM-5 under the age of 13, and just depends, the secondary sex characteristics sort of are a defining mark, and some children here are very much advanced, and so, I don't know, 13, 11, some people over in Eastern countries, Far East, it's going to be older than that is considered a child, because the secondary sexual characteristics don't develop until a later age. We need to press on with these. So what is abuse? Harm, improper practice, physical and or emotional harm, or risk of harm. So, it's not just the doing, but the risk of harm. They do not need to determine actual harm by sexual interaction of adult with child. It's always considered abuse. And I think we recognize that it doesn't have to be hands-on. It can be implied, even in like in a marriage where there's abuse and the husband's not actually abusing the wife, and the wife is not physically abusing, but there's emotional abuse. So abuse is not again, it's a broad term. Some of the offences, I see the time is gone. I think I need to look at, so I do have some notes at the back and I can always send you some. I have got some of those there. Contact offences, child molestation, even if no actual physical contact. So child molestation doesn't have to be the hands-on. It can be, there is put as masturbation in front of a minor, exposing genitals.
Non-contact offense usually refers to pornography.
Right.
Pornography.
But exposing the genitals is one of that too.
No, it's called a contact offense, even though there's not physical contact between the two people. Like
Oh, you mean exposing the genitals itself? Of contact offense?
Not an important distinction.
And then states have various, laws that differ. I'm going to go through this quickly because I'm late. Pornography, viewing pornography.
We'll get more into that later.
Right. And you notice that there are certain levels of this where fully clothed children or even children's faces, we've all got cute children or grandchildren or something, might be just fine, but when we would all agree with probably 2, 3, 4, and 5 as being some form of pornography, but there are different levels of pornography, and whether it's mixed with normal photography or whether it's all the sort down on the lower levels. I think we'll skip this one. We're sort of asking here about masturbation as a non-contact offense, not rated as disexual. Where would we say it was? If we said normal sexuality was rated from 1 to 10, and then the disexual behaviors are down beneath the 1, 0, I guess, something like that, 0 to -10, where would we put masturbation? I bet there would be all sorts of different answers here because we wouldn't all agree on that. And then if you start saying, well, what are you masturbating to? Is it fantasies or is the masturbation to child pornography? And we live in a world where there are so many groups of people, and here we put domains, different perspectives, and pornography, according to a moral code, might be unacceptable in the social code. What about pedophilia? Where are people making their judgments? Is it always psychologically damaging? Is it always physiologically damaging? It's not, there isn't a hard and fast rule with those. Is it ethical? See, we look at things and we say it's not ethical to do something. You shouldn't be stealing from the elderly, but it's okay to steal from your neighbor because they have much too much money, and so let's lessen that. I don't have enough money, so it's okay for me to steal. We rationalize these things and other people rationalize them, but there's a lot of different aspects that look at pedophilia and gives a lot of different answers. They give different answers to this. There's a lot of penalties that come with this, and I'm sure some of you know about these. Oops, I think there's one more. But it's risk these sort of things. We don't want children to be at risk, and we don't want people who are sexually attracted to children to pay this price. There's a big price to be paid with this for families, and even now there are questions that says being placed on the sex offender registry, should it be for a lifetime? Should a child that's put on a sex offender registry at the age of 13 still be suffering the consequences when they're 23 and 43 and 63? They were 13-year-olds doing things that they shouldn't be doing and interacting with someone of the opposite gender or something, and they got put on the sex offender registry. To me, things I did when I was 13 probably were very stupid. You know, should they be on that? So I don't know. These are just things that we need to think about. Oh, recidivism, I added that. What is recidivism? Is it reoffending or redetection? Because the data is about redetection. So they're back in the system. They were caught. But it's not, it's really about reoffending. But we've got to realize people are thinking, they're probably thinking about redetection. Yeah.
They say, when you say redetection, you're referring to committing crimes of a non-sexual nature that aren't.
No, I'm talking about them committing the same crime. So they are registered sex offenders, and the data comes in and it says, you know, the recidivism rate is such and such. But they get caught again, and that goes into the data.
Mostly they get caught on a parole violation. Those for offenders might clarify this for us. You know, it had nothing to do with sex, but they got to register.
Right, that's what I'm saying, is redetection referring to something like they haven't done no sexual crimes.
You know, often that's,
Right.
but it's still included as if it's recidivism.
Gotcha.
Okay, well, my emphasis is in the fact that we look at those recidivism, the data, and we say, oh, we're doing pretty well, you know, it's all going along quite well. But the point is, from my perspective, is the people are still reoffending, but they're not getting caught. But that is what recidivism is. It's going back and doing the same behavior. Well, if you're not caught, then it doesn't appear on the data. So just when you hear that, you know, think for yourself, decide what you're going to. My idea is that it is reoffending, and redetection of that is probably not going to be the case. So the data is skewed.
Well, and in Oregon, it's only for 3 years. Recidivism, they only keep track of it for 3 years.
And that is not even enough. That is no way enough, because most people for the 3 years, they're okay for 3 years. Give them 10 years, or the fact that the majority of them are going to be living another 50, 60 years, that is no way to even consider the recidivism data as being accurate. They need to follow, there's a Canadian study where they followed them for 20 years. And of course, and a number, of course, had been redetected and gone back into jail or whatever it was, or but they felt that even the 20 years was not long enough, that one needs more, because they're going to be living a lot longer. Primary prevention, secondary, and tertiary. Tertiary prevention, we'll go through quickly. Primary prevention is that we're going to, before something happens, CSA, as you know, child sexual abuse, primary prevention of child sexual abuse. More people are becoming aware of this, more bystanders are going to report. A child is encouraged to be active. We are trying to institute criminal background checks. We're trying to become a safer society to avoid. This is all before it happens. We don't want anything to happen and then start doing something. Some people will attend programs, online support groups. Again, if you are non-offending, even if you have offended, it can't be primary. If you have offended, it cannot be primary. Primary prevention is before something happens. Attending workshops like this, going to counseling, all of these are primary if it's before something has taken place. Secondary, of course, if something has taken place, what is going to happen there. So in secondary, the families are affected, give them counseling, support them, help access support groups, continue to discuss this matter. And for the perpetrators, removed from society might be what has to be done. But why remove a person from society indefinitely if there's no need for it? You know, and I think as we study this more, as people become more aware, rehabilitation, counseling, reintegrate, and then tertiary. Tertiary prevention might be things that we can do for survivors here. We might have to, some people would have to be locked away indefinitely, but this is a very small proportion. So we're all for primary and helping those who have been abused and those who have a sexual attraction to children. It's not a ticking time bomb. There are things that you can do, and silence is the friend of abuse, and we need to speak about it. And I think people are learning. I think people are beginning to listen much more over the years. But so I'd rather to go through this.
Thank you, Tabitha. It is 10 o'clock. We had scheduled to have a break at 10, so why don't we take a few minutes? And then Kenneth will not be pressed for time.
Yeah.
Are there any questions? Any other questions?
Just, has everyone signed this?
Lunch?
We don't seem to have as many signs as we've got coming.
I don't think Michael's seen it yet.
You haven't,
Yeah,
okay.
we didn't have time.
1, 2, 1, 2.
I didn't say so.
Oh.
That's why I didn't.
I think we'll
Well,
have to-
anyone who does care, have they
They all